Thanks for joining us on the CBN News Channel. I'm Charlene Israel. The pilots of Asiana Airlines Flight 214 are shedding some light on what went wrong in that deadly crash in San Francisco. On Tuesday, NTSB investigators revealed new information on the pilots and their flying experience.
It was a last-minute discovery with a tragic outcome. The pilots of Asiana Airlines Flight 214 told federal investigators that they were relying on the plane's automatic throttle controls. They discovered too late that the plane had slowed far beyond the set landing speed.
He recognized that the auto throttles were not maintaining speed, and he established a go-around attitude.
The crash that followed killed 2 of the 307 people on board and injured hundreds of others. 5 people are still in critical condition, with many serious spinal and internal injuries from being whipped back and forth as the plane spun.
Oh my God, maybe we're going to die right now, because it felt like it maybe would roll.
NTSB investigators say there were 4 pilots on board the plane at the time of the landing. 3 of them were on the flight deck. The supervising pilot had 3,000 hours of experience logged on the plane, but this was his first trip as an instructor pilot.
This was the first time that he and the flying pilot that he was instructing had flown together.
Still, in a press conference Tuesday, investigators cautioned the public from jumping to conclusions as to whether a mechanical or pilot error is to blame for the crash. The auto throttles are being looked into now, how they were working and how they were used. George Thomas, CBN News.
The ACLU is suing Pennsylvania to overturn the state's ban on same-sex marriage. The move comes after 2 weeks after the Supreme Court ruled that a federal ban on gay marriage is unconstitutional. The ACLU wants to legalize gay marriage in Pennsylvania and force the state to recognize the marriages of homosexual couples who wed in other states. Opponents say gay rights activists are using the courts to push their agenda rather than letting the people decide. Thomas Peters of the National Organization of Marriage says those activists only support the voice of the people when they think it will go their way. Meanwhile, the ACLU also plans to challenge the same-sex marriage ban in Virginia. A new alternative organization to the Boy Scouts says it will welcome boys of all faiths, but require its leaders to adhere to a Christian faith statement. The organization detailed its plans in a press conference Tuesday. The group says some 30,000 families have contacted it, saying they plan to leave the Scouts and want a faith-based organization. The group says it will focus on the outdoors and character development. Boys who struggle with same-sex attraction will be allowed, but the group says it will not allow them to, quote, flaunt any same-sex orientation. The organization will announce its new name in September and launch next January. Some in Washington are trying to force military members to keep their religious beliefs quiet. A coalition of religious liberty advocates presented a report Tuesday citing dozens of cases of anti-religious acts by the military in recent months and years. The coalition is backing troops' rights to speak about and act on their beliefs. On Capitol Hill, they announced they'd be passing out palm cards to troops, letting them know that their religious rights are, what their religious rights are, and who to turn to if they feel the military is violating those rights.
Back in April, Admiral William Dean Lee of the Coast Guard stood up at a local prayer breakfast and explained how he, as an admiral in the Coast Guard, was told that it was prohibited for him to give a Bible to a man who had just attempted suicide.
We have an Air Force officer for 23 years. Everywhere he set up his shop, he would always put a Bible on his desk. He came to a new location, put his Bible on his desk. His superior officer told him, "You cannot put your Bible on the desk because it may offend someone."
Meanwhile, Congressman John Fleming is fighting for an amendment to protect religious expression in the military. He says chaplains feel restricted in how they can pray and preach, and officers are being warned to avoid open displays of their faith. The shooting rampage at a U.S. military base in Texas that left 13 people dead was the result of political correctness. That, according to Oklahoma Republican Jim Bridenstine. Bridenstine says Major Nadal Hassan was open about his radical Islamist views before the shooting, but his Army supervisors didn't take action for fear of appearing intolerant. Jury selection in the murder trial has started. Hassan is apparently planning to tell potential jurors that he was forced to wear a military uniform which he believes represents, quote, an enemy of Islam. Hassan told the court he spends hours reading the Quran in his cell every day. The State Department says Iranian influence in Latin America is shrinking, but some experts say that assessment is wrong. So they went to Congress to highlight the radical Islamic regime's ongoing intrusions. Dale Hurd has the story.
House Republicans called a hearing after a recent State Department report said Iran's influence in the Western Hemisphere was waning. Experts before a Homeland Security subcommittee said Iran is still cultivating a vast terrorist network in Latin America that threatens the United States.
In effect, what the Iranian regime is doing is, as it has become constrained in its immediate periphery, it has begun to look further afield for allies in various regions of the world.
But missing from the hearing was the star witness, Argentine Special Prosecutor Alberto Nisman, who was prevented from traveling to Washington by the Argentine government. In May, Nisman announced that Iran has infiltrated several countries in Latin America, including Brazil, Chile, and Colombia, for the purpose of setting up intelligence networks to carry out more terrorist attacks in the region. Nisman was the prosecutor who brought charges against Iranian officials for the 1994 bombing of a Buenos Aires Jewish center that killed 85 people. Members of the Homeland Security Subcommittee have sent a letter of protest to the Argentine government for preventing Nisman from the hearing, which itself could be a sign of Iran putting pressure on a Latin American country. Dale Hurd, CBN News.
The Boston Marathon bomber will make his first appearance in court today. The 19-year-old Dzhokhar Tsarnaev is charged with using a weapon of mass destruction in 2 bombings that killed 3 and wounded 264 people. Tsarnaev will come face to face with some of those who were injured in the attack as he enters a plea in a Boston courthouse. No trial date has been set yet. Egypt's interim government announced a roadmap for new elections and selected a new prime minister. He immediately asked the Muslim Brotherhood to be part of his new cabinet, but they rejected his offer. As Muslims begin the month of Ramadan, Egypt also starts on a new political course into an uncertain and potentially troubled future. Chris Mitchell has more from Cairo.
This is Tahrir Square, the epicenter of the huge demonstrations that have taken place in the past few weeks. Here, Egyptians have gathered by the millions and changed the course of Egypt's history.
Change the atmosphere as if you are breathing a new air, a fresh air, freedom.
Pastor Sami Taufik of the El Deborah Evangelical Church just outside of Tahrir Square describes the events of the past few weeks as nothing short of miraculous.
For me, it's a miracle. It's a miracle. It's God's hands. Nobody can do that. We could see God's hands in the first revolution, the 25th of January. But this time we see it more clearly.
In another part of Cairo, Father Antoni Grish, the spokesman of Egypt's Catholic Church, also says he sees the hand of God.
We consider the dismissal of Morsi and his party, his community, his Muslim Brotherhood, is really a miracle. It was the hand of God. Because one day before his dismissal, we could never think or dream that he would leave. So it is the hand of God. We see it clearly.
He says the Muslim Brotherhood wanted to establish an Islamic caliphate and change Egypt.
The Muslim Brotherhood who were trying to steal Egypt. Now all the Christians and the Egyptians will tell you, now we regained Egypt as we know it. That everybody is free.
Yet that freedom's future is uncertain. Whether or not the Muslim Brotherhood will continue to reject the new government or even begin a new violent intifada remains to be seen. That's why Christians throughout Egypt are asking for prayer for Egypt's future. Chris Mitchell, CBN News, Cairo, Egypt.
House Republicans spoke out against Obamacare Tuesday. The Obama administration recently delayed the requirement for employers to provide health insurance until after the 2014 election. But Speaker of the House John Boehner says that's not good enough.
Today we sent a letter to the president asking him to justify delaying the employer mandate while leaving in place the mandate on individuals and families. Because if businesses can get relief from Obamacare, the rest of America ought to be able to get relief as well.
Boehner went on to say the president's decision to use the honor system to hand out subsidies opens up taxpayers to extensive fraud and abuse. He also says because of Obamacare, millions of full-time workers can only find part-time jobs and health care costs are skyrocketing. An Indiana university is under fire for hiring a professor who wrote a book on intelligent design. That's the belief that life is too complex and the universe too finely coordinated to have evolved by accident. Ball State University defended its decision to hire Guillermo Gonzalez. In 2004, he wrote a book called The Privileged Planet: How Our Place in the Cosmos is Designed for Discovery. The university says Guillermo will be teaching science, not religion. This comes after the Freedom from Religion Foundation accused another professor at the school of teaching creationism. Coming up, what did this street preacher say that got him arrested in London? We'll tell you the shocking details right after this.
From CBN.
Broken Eardrum is playing at the Civic tonight.
And you'll just have to miss it.
This is so incredibly unfair.
A special story of love and sacrifice.
Joy, Mom comes up with something.
Christopher Quantum, you and I are going to discuss your attitude right this minute. Superbook.
No.
Join the Superbook DVD Club and get Superbook's newest episode, He is Risen. Plus 2 copies to share with others. All for your gift of $25.
They have arrested Jesus, the Messiah. Do you not know that I have the power to crucify you?
No! Please! You can't! They've taken him to Golgotha. We must hurry. Mary is about to lose her son. The worst thing any mother could face. I am not leaving her.
Superbook. It's an amazing way to build a strong spiritual foundation in the children you love.
Mary, who are you looking for?
I've seen him! He is alive!
Superbook. He is Risen. Available now.
Welcome back. The Church of England will once again take up the issue of ordaining women bishops. The church's governing body agreed to put its support behind drafting new proposals that would open the door to women becoming bishops by 2015. A similar proposal failed last year. The issue gained momentum this year after a speech by new Archbishop of Canterbury, Justin Welby. Currently, the Church of England allows women to become priests, but not bishops. A former Los Angeles County Sheriff's deputy was arrested for street preaching in London last week. He was arrested because he called homosexuality a sin. Heather Sells has that story.
49-year-old father of 3 Tony Miano took early retirement to become a full-time preacher 2 years ago. He says 2 police officers approached him as he was street preaching against sexual immorality.
They asked me what I was preaching about and if I had talked about homosexuality. I said that I did. They continued their investigation, and at about 4:20 p.m., I was arrested for what they told me was homophobic hate speech.
Okay, I'm arresting you for Section 5 public order. Okay, this is because people have been offended by what you said.
Miano says even during all his years as a deputy sheriff, he'd never encountered the type of questioning that he faced from the London police.
I was asked specifically that if a person walked up to me and they were a homosexual and they were hungry, would I give them something to eat? And I was a deputy sheriff in Los Angeles for 20 years. I served as an investigator. I've done many interrogations. And never once had I ever participated in an interrogation that was about somebody's faith.
Miano's lawyer, working with the Christian Legal Center, initially told him he could be detained for a considerable amount of time.
The magistrate could order you to stay in the country until the trial is completed, which could be 3 or 4 months away.
Fortunately, Miano's lawyer was able to ensure his immediate release with no charge.
About an hour or so later, the investigator came into my cell, and I was expecting him to say that the Crown prosecutors had decided to go forward with the case. But what he said amazed me, and I knew it was the hand of God. He said that the inspector has decided to release you with no further action.
The Metropolitan Police Department was unable to comment on camera on the matter, but in a statement said that Miano was, quote, speaking through a public address system and was alleged to have made homophobic comments. He was arrested on suspicion of offenses under the Public Order Act and was released with no further action later the same day. Miano says he is deeply concerned at the lack of freedom to preach the Bible in a supposedly Christian nation.
I find it astonishing that here in Great Britain, that someone like me could come to the streets of London, open up my Bible, preach from the Word of God what the Bible says about all sin, and then when I specifically mention a pet sin of the society, in this case homosexuality, I'm demonized, I'm vilified, I'm treated like a criminal.
The Christian Legal Center says while Miano was able to walk free for now, it expects his arrest will simply be the first of many more to come. It remains determined to help all Christians fight for their freedom of speech and the right to preach the gospel. As for Miano, he'll continue to share the good news on the streets, but instead of the UK, he's now returned to the US, where at least for now, he doesn't expect his street preaching to get him arrested. Heather Sells, CBN News.
Up next, is California shooting the golden goose? How crippling taxes are forcing a reverse gold rush. California, it was once an American paradise, but now it's bleeding jobs and people. Paul Strand explains why so many businesses are getting out of the Golden State.
California was once the dream destination of millions of people, but now it's losing millions of them. And much of it has to do with high taxes and a generally anti-business attitude. Economic analyst Jonathan Williams points out what California lost in just 2011.
Nearly 250 companies of all sizes left California for one of the other 49 states.
Ethan Anderson started at Google before striking out to create 2 new companies on his own.
I am hearing almost every single day somebody saying I'm leaving California because they're trying to avoid the high taxes.
And now California is even taxing backwards in time, deciding to demand more money from entrepreneurs and investors for past years. It claims a tax break used by them is no longer valid, and it wants them to pay up.
Now you guys owe us taxes going back 5 years ago, and we want interest on those taxes as well. It's a very scary environment to operate in when the rules of the game can change, not just going forward, but going back in time.
California is a fantastic place to live, don't get me wrong. It's just not a great place to do business.
Brian Overstreet, who started up 2 businesses in California, has suddenly found himself owing an extra $250,000 because of this sudden move by the state to impose back taxes for the past 5 years.
It's the perfect time to start new businesses. But when the state of California is telling you, we're going to change the rules on you after the fact by up to 5 years, that puts a lot of strain and it puts a lot of questions into people's minds as to whether they really want to go through that or not.
Looking forward, would I want to start another business here? Maybe not. Maybe it's a little bit too risky. Because what if they make the business I'm doing illegal? What if they decide they want to do another 50% tax increase on my business, right?
It's not just a matter of taxes, but of over-regulation and over-litigation, too. Texas Governor Rick Perry has lately been launching strikes into California to encourage unhappy companies to leave.
When you have small businesses that takes months, if not over a year, to get a simple permit to be able to build or do some work. I mean, the unions and the strangulation by regulation in California is just, it's incredibly onerous. So they're doing a lot of things wrong.
And Perry can point to policies in his Texas that are just the opposite, that free businesses up.
Give people more freedom from over-taxation, over-regulation, over-litigation, and it works.
Overstreet says Texas and the especially high-tech hub of Austin have such a wonderful reputation, they're tempting his business buddies to move there.
And I can tell you a number of them have told me specifically that they are very actively starting to look at that for their companies.
Eric Loeffel and his company, Compass Learning, have already made the move from California to Austin.
It was hard for us to do business there, harder to do business there than it is to do business here in Texas.
The move was expensive, but the tax savings enormous.
In the first year that we moved, we figured that the savings was about $1 million.
One of the main benefits, no income tax in Texas, meaning a big hike in the paychecks of all the workers who moved.
Everybody got an automatic increase in pay. Automatic.
Williams says the employers he knows talk about this all the time.
Our employees are clamoring to leave high tax locations that we have in California and go to lower cost of living states.
And now this urge to exit high tax states has become a major national trend. Workers and businesses are fleeing in droves from the top 10 high-tax blue states, like California, to the top 10 low-tax red states, like Texas.
1 American per minute has left one of the high-tax states over the last decade.
That adds up to an exodus of about 4.5 million Americans from the highest tax states to the lowest.
People vote with their feet, and they're voting very strongly towards the low-tax states.
Talent and money are the most transferable things in this economy right now, and it doesn't much matter whether you work in Austin or California. And if you can do better for yourself, you can provide your employees a better base and a better lifestyle, you have to be considering it.
If this trend continues, America could end up with a group of economically failing, possibly bankrupt states who chase their wealth away.
You're going to lose your business leaders, and you're going to be left with a population that is more dependent on the welfare state.
California's going to end up getting less taxes than they would have gotten if they just left things alone, because now all these people who are generally wealthy are leaving.
William says lawmakers in well-to-do states are telling him they're frightened they'll be forced to someday bail out a bunch of deadbeat states.
They say, well, if California is the new Greece, why are we going to give our hard-earned tax dollars to bail out basket cases like California and Illinois?
And Anderson is worried his home state won't turn itself away from this economic downward spiral.
California had so many gifts. How could this state actually be bleeding people? It seems like they're trying to shoot the goose that lays the golden egg.
For generations, thousands of companies have been proud to fly the California flag, loving to live here. But as they're feeling more threatened by this state, plenty of businesses are warning they may have to go. And they mean business. Paul Strand, CBN News, reporting from Torrance, California.
Finally, a burglary victim was able to track down the culprit without having to call the police. She said she did have to make one call, though, to the perpetrator's mom. Eliza Webb noticed her car had been broken into. She also noticed a black cell phone that wasn't hers. Webb figured out the phone belonged to a 19-year-old, and she called his mom.
I said, this is a very uncomfortable phone call to make. I have your son's phone, and I'm missing some things out of my car, and I think they might be two related items.
Webb and her husband went to the teen's home. They learned they weren't the only victims. The teen and a friend got drunk and broke into other cars in the neighborhood. Webb then invited the teens to go door to door and apologize to the people they'd stolen from. Webb says she just wanted the teens to own up and to understand the consequences. Good for her. Good lesson learned, hopefully. That's all for now on the CBN News Channel. You can find more of our exclusive coverage of the issues you care most about at cbnnews.com. And tell us what you think about the stories you've seen today. You can do that on Facebook or at CBN News on Twitter. Hope you join us next time. Have a great day. God bless.
Introducing the CBN Bible from CBN.com. Now, an easier way to study the Bible and grow in your faith. Highlight your favorite verse. Read separate versions at a glance. Click and read a commentary. Or cross-reference your favorite verse using the Strong's Concordance. All the right tools to study the Bible, all in one place. The CBN Bible, available at cbn.com/Bible or the iTunes App Store.